tonight, before you drift too far into sleep, imagine stepping into a December that feels strangely quiet after years of noise, a December stitched together from relief, exhaustion, and the unfamiliar hush that follows a storm that has finally passed, because you are entering America in the winter of 1945, a country that has survived something enormous and is now standing still long enough to feel the weight of it. As you move gently through this moment, take a second to settle in, and if you enjoy stories that unfold slowly like this, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you comfort. And if you're still awake enough, leave a comment with where you're listening from, and what time it is right now, like a quiet roll call of souls sharing the same calm night. Now, dim the lights. You step forward into December 1945, and the air feels sharper than usual, not just from the cold, but from everything that is finally settling after years of tension, because peace has arrived on paper. Yet the body, the streets, and the homes have not fully caught up to the idea that the danger has passed. Snow gathers softly on wooden porches as if the landscape itself is trying to muffle its own sounds. Floorboards creak beneath your careful steps, and somewhere in the distance a radio hums a cheerful tune that wobbles slightly, as though even the music is unsure whether it's allowed to be joyful yet. This is the first Christmas after the war, officially over just weeks earlier when President Truman declared the end of hostilities in November. But even with that announcement lingering in the background, the season feels tentative, like walking into a house after a long argument, unsure whether the silence means peace or just exhaustion. You move through a modest living room where a Christmas tree stands half-decorated, its branches slightly uneven, almost confused, as if it remembers the sparse wartime holidays and doesn't quite trust abundance yet, and the smell of pine mixes with warm radiator air and old ornaments pulled carefully from boxes that have not been opened properly in years. Some families still tie ribbons made from repurposed fabric, even scraps of parachute silk saved from the war, materials once meant for survival now turned into symbols of celebration, rustling softly in your hands like the past folding itself away, slowly and carefully. The lights on the tree flicker, partly because the bulbs are cheap, partly because the wiring is old, but mostly because this is a season still finding its balance, blinking between grief and hope, learning how to stay on. In the kitchen, someone stirs a pot that smells faintly of spices and sugar, measured carefully, because even though the war has ended, rationing habits remain carved deep into muscle memory, and many staples are still limited, teaching families to celebrate in careful, improvised ways rather than lavish ones. A child kneels near the tree, trying to hang a tin ornament that once belonged to a relative who served overseas, humming softly without realizing it, the kind of tune that adults recognize immediately as borrowed optimism, because children absorb the emotional weather of a room long before they have words for it. The adults speak in low voices not because they need to anymore, but because wartime taught them that quiet feels safer, and laughter, when it comes, sometimes collapses halfway through, unfamiliar with its own shape after years of restraint. Outside, the street glows dimly under a single lamp as snow drifts sideways, and a neighbor mutters under their breath while stringing lights along a porch, celebrating when a stubborn bulb finally works, because in 1945 most victories are small, personal, and deeply felt. Teenagers pass by wrapped in thick coats, laughing a little too loudly, relieved to finally release joy without apology, talking excitedly about school Christmas programs returning in full for the first time in years, even as their voices soften briefly when they acknowledge that not everyone made it home. Inside local shops, shelves are still thin, factories only beginning to shift away from wartime production, and simple toys sell out almost instantly, making this a Christmas built from leftovers, patience, and anticipation, rather than excess. A young mother stands debating whether to buy a small ornament, doing careful mental arithmetic shaped by years of scarcity, until her child tugs her sleeve and smiles, and suddenly the decision feels less like a cost and more like a promise. Tin cans flattened into stars hang on trees, paper chains made from magazine scraps, drape windows, and wreaths are thinner than modern ones, yet every handmade decoration carries a quiet pride, a reminder that survival taught creativity before it ever allowed comfort. As night settles deeper, you notice something subtle changing, not dramatically, but gently, as if the country itself is learning how to breathe again. Not fully healed, not fully ready, but trying, and in December 1945, trying is enough to feel like progress. And you remain here, drifting quietly through these homes and streets, where Christmas is not loud or perfect, but fragile, human, and deeply sincere, waiting patiently for what comes next. You wander deeper into the sleeping neighborhoods of post-war America, where every porch light trembles faintly in the cold, and every shadow seems to hold its breath, because this December carries the weight of return, of reunion, of trying to remember how to be normal again, after years of living at the edge of disaster. And in these streets lined with frost-silvered windows and tired roofs, you feel the pulse of a country caught between relief and disbelief, between gratitude and grief, between what was lost and what somehow endured. Inside one small wooden house, the door opens with the kind of hesitation that only love mixed with fear can produce, and a young soldier steps across the threshold, his uniform pressed but already too small for the new version of himself he has become, and his mother reaches for him, stopping halfway, because she does not know how to touch someone who looks like her son, but moves like a stranger, and for a long moment they simply stare at each other, both searching for a familiar rhythm that the war has stolen. He smiles, a tired, uneven smile that doesn't quite know where to rest, and she lets out a sound that is neither laughter nor sobbing, but something in between, something human and raw, that belongs only to this strange kind of joy. Historians call this period Operation Magic Carpet, the Great Homecoming, 2 million soldiers returning across oceans and rails, but no statistic captures the quiet that falls inside a hallway when a duffel bag drops to the floor, and the smell of wool and salt air mingles with the smell of radiator heat and family soup, and time itself seems to pause, cautious, waiting to see if peace is real this time. That night, the soldier lies awake staring at the ceiling, the mattress shifting under him with every breath, and he realizes he no longer remembers how to sleep in a bed that gives instead of resisting. That peace feels soft in a way that makes his body tense, and before dawn he has already dragged a board from the shed and slipped it beneath the springs, the solid surface anchoring him like the hard ground of barracks and battlefields. A small attempt to make comfort feel trustworthy again. Down the hall his mother listens for movement, unsure whether to feel pride, sorrow, or something heavier that cannot yet be named. And in the darkness the house learns to hold its silence like a fragile truce. Across the street, another home glows with a different kind of tension. Here a soldier has returned not alone but with a young woman at his side, a fiancé met during training, married quickly under the urgency of wartime, and now brought home to meet a family that doesn't yet know what to make of her bright smile and trembling hands. The living room smells of cocoa and uncertainty, the parents offering polite questions about where she's from, the young woman laughing a little too loudly, eager to belong, her voice fluttering through the room like a bird that has lost its sense of direction. She folds her hands neatly in her lap, and though everyone tries to act natural, the air carries that faint metallic hum of people rehearsing normal life in a space that no longer remembers how to host it. Farther down the block, another man stands outside a house with no light in its windows, his breath forming small ghosts in the cold, his gloved hand holding a folded note, left months ago by the family who could not bear waiting any longer. And when he finishes reading, he nods once, calmly, because there is nothing else to do, and he tucks the note deep into his pocket, as though burying it close to his heart could make it hurt less. He looks up at the horizon, sees the faint smear of dawn rising over the snow, and realizes that going home will sometimes mean finding out that home has moved on. In yet another living room, a father sits alone beside the fire, a sealed wooden box from the War Department balanced carefully on his knees, and the paper tag tied to its handle flutters each time the heat shifts, and the mother pretends to busy herself in the kitchen, while a small child on the floor arranges wooden blocks into crooked towers, unaware that the silence in the room has changed its texture forever, that it has become a living thing. Outside, snow thickens and softens everything it touches, blurring rooftops, hiding footsteps, whispering the same gentle lie over every wound that the past can be covered if you are patient enough. This, more than the headlines or the speeches, is what Christmas in 1945 really feels like. A country stitched together by small, trembling gestures of reunion, a fragile orchestra of doors opening, hands hesitating, eyes searching, people trying to learn again how to laugh without guilt, and to love without fear, the quiet sound of a nation breathing in peace for the first time, and not quite knowing how to exhale it. And as you drift along those dimly lit streets, watching light spill from windows onto the snow, you sense that even though the war is finally over, the work of coming home has only just begun, and somehow that too is its own kind of miracle. You step quietly into another home where the windows glow softly and the smell of baking drifts through the air, not rich or heavy but faint, modest, like the echo of sweetness remembered rather than fully restored, because even though rationing has officially ended, the habits it carved into people's lives have not yet loosened their grip, and every cupboard in America still carries the ghost of scarcity. In this kitchen, the air is warm but the light is dim, yellowed by years of thrift, and on the counter sits a small tin marked sugar, half empty, its contents measured with a care that borders on reverence, because everyone still remembers how easily enough could turn into none. A woman leans over a mixing bowl, her hands steady but cautious, adding ingredients as though negotiating with fate itself, and the recipe card beside her is smudged and folded from years of reuse, its edges softened by repetition and resolve. She has learned, as so many have, how to coax comfort out of very little, how to stretch flavor the way others stretch time, and even now, when she could finally allow herself to be generous, she hesitates, not out of fear, but because the discipline of survival has become its own strange form of faith. Historians often note that sugar rationing continued well into 1947, that meat and butter and coffee remained difficult to find, and that even in peace, ships carrying foreign supplies were delayed by storms and bureaucracy. So families like hers learned to improvise endlessly, trading recipes and substitutions like secrets passed down through prayer, boiling raisins to mimic syrup, saving bacon grease in glass jars for baking, using every crumb as though it might carry meaning. You watch her spoon batter onto a tray, the sound of the metal against enamel rhythmic and patient, and you realize that this small act of care, baking cookies in a year that still tastes faintly of austerity, is her way of declaring victory, quiet, domestic and holy. Behind her, a radio hums low, its static blending with the sound of the oven door closing, and for a moment the whole room feels suspended, wrapped in the warmth of something fragile but alive. You move toward the dining room where decorations hang with a sweetness only necessity can produce. Paper chains made from magazine clippings, garlands twisted from leftover thread, bits of tin foil cut into stars that catch the lamplight like fragments of moonlight. The children who made them sit on the floor, proudly explaining which magazine page became which color loop, and their mother smiles, her eyes shining in that soft way that knows beauty is rarely about perfection. On the table sits a single bowl of hard candy, its surface catching the glow from the fire, and you know without being told that this is the family's treasure, the treat saved, traded, bartered for, an offering to remind them that joy still exists even when it's rationed. Two older women sit nearby folding napkins, and laughing quietly about the days when coffee was stretched with roasted chicory and margarine, came with a packet of yellow dye that had to be kneaded in by hand, their laughter fragile but full, the sound of endurance turning slowly into nostalgia. Outside, the neighborhood looks festive in its own improvised way, but if you look closely you can see the restraint written in every string of lights and every thin wreath hung on every front door. Many families still use fewer bulbs to save electricity, a habit left over from wartime conservation campaigns, and the wreaths themselves are smaller, made not from fresh evergreen but from scraps of cloth and ribbon, dyed green to imitate abundance. Yet there's something deeply touching in their unevenness. Buttons sewn into circles, walnut shells painted gold, paper snowflakes that curl slightly from the heat of nearby lamps, because every decoration says the same thing. We made this ourselves, and that is enough. Down the street, a family carries home a small, uneven Christmas tree, its trunk crooked, its branches missing in places, but the children hold it proudly between them as if it were a monument, and their parents exchange a quick smile, the kind that says they know happiness can still be purchased cheaply. In the grocery store, the aisles are narrow, the shelves half-stocked, and the grocer stands behind the counter with his sleeves rolled up, explaining to a customer that oranges might arrive by Christmas Eve if the trains run on time. The air smells faintly of coal dust and wood crates, and the low murmur of conversation carries the rhythm of patience learned through necessity. A small note tacked near the register advertises 1 orange per customer, and the handwriting itself feels reverent, as though fruit was still a sacred thing. You watch a woman buy flour, measuring the cost against the weight in her hands, and when she leaves, she presses the brown paper bag to her chest as though protecting it from the cold. Outside, the snow catches the light of shop windows and turns it into something dreamlike, and the world feels quieter, more deliberate, more grateful. You wander into another kitchen, this one belonging to a teenage girl standing over a stove, stirring a pot of custard with nervous determination. Her hands tremble slightly as she follows a recipe her grandmother once made before rationing began, determined to bring it back to life for the first peacetime Christmas she can remember. The mixture thickens unevenly, and she bites her lip, adjusting the flame, refusing to let failure win. Her mother watches silently from the doorway, her expression soft and proud, because she knows that this small act of stubbornness, this insistence on sweetness, is the purest sign that the world is beginning to heal. On a nearby table rests a worn ration book, its pages scribbled with pencil notes about what was stretched and when, and though it's no longer needed, no one can bear to throw it away. It remains there like a relic, a record of endurance that has earned its place among the family's holy things. Later that night, in the neighborhood community hall, families gather for a potluck, the first real one in years, and the tables are lined with casseroles bulked up with breadcrumbs, pies that taste more of memory than of fruit, and a ham that took months of saving meat stamps to obtain. Everyone laughs softly as dishes are passed, grateful not for abundance but for the feeling of togetherness. The air smells of warmth and effort and quiet pride, and the conversation drifts easily between talk of jobs, schools, babies, and the strange new silence of a country without sirens. Children chase each other around the tables, their shoes slipping on the wooden floor, their laughter echoing up into the rafters, and for the first time in a long time, no one tells them to hush. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, soft, almost secretive, and through the frosted windows you can see the glow of lanterns and the silhouettes of people who have learned that celebration is not about having everything. It's about remembering how to want softly, how to savor without fear of loss. The wind hums low, the lights flicker gently, and you can almost feel the nation itself exhaling, a long, slow sigh of gratitude and exhaustion, a country relearning how to fill its cupboards and its heart at the same time. And as you drift farther down those snow-covered streets, you realize that scarcity has done something unexpected to these people. It has not diminished their joy, it has distilled it, boiled it down to its purest form, leaving behind something humbler but infinitely more real, a sweetness that no sugar ration could ever measure. You step out into the brittle morning air of late December 1945, and the first thing you notice is the silence where machines used to roar, a kind of hollow quiet that smells faintly of cold metal and dust, because the factories that once pulsed like living beasts during the war are now dim, their enormous bellies cooling, their conveyor belts resting after years of relentless movement, and what remains inside them, are ghosts of noise and women standing at the threshold between usefulness and dismissal. For nearly 4 years these women filled the spaces that men left behind, and the world called them Rosie, a nickname polished into heroism by posters and songs, but none of them ever used it among themselves. They simply worked tightening bolts, welding frames, stitching parachutes, testing engines, carrying the weight of a war that demanded their strength, and then quietly prepared to forget it. Now the war is over, and the government urges gratitude mixed with retreat, as though the act of survival were temporary, as though the country could simply be rewound to its earlier settings. And you watch them leaving the factory gates in 2s and 3s, their coats buttoned high, their hair tucked beneath scarves, their faces pale from the cold but flushed from something deeper, the unease of being needed and then uninvited. The pavement glistens faintly with oil, the smell of it clinging to their gloves, a scent that used to mean pride and wages and independence, now fading into nostalgia before the month has even ended. One woman pulls off her work gloves and rubs her hands together for warmth, her palms rough, her fingers nicked, and she tells her friend that she'll be let go after the new year because the plant is switching from bomb casings to refrigerators, and management says the mechanical jobs belong to the returning men. She says this lightly, like a fact she's already swallowed, but you can taste the bitterness in her voice, a quiet ache disguised as practicality. A bus waits nearby, its engine shuddering against the frost, and the women climb aboard, the same route they have taken for years, but now the mood is different. No chatter, no laughter clattering against the metal seats, just the soft creak of fabric and the occasional sigh that sounds like resignation, learning how to breathe. One woman mentions she might get clerical work for half the pay. Another says she'll go back to cleaning houses for a family who never knew how capable she was. Their words mingle with the rattle of the bus, and you sense the invisible weight pressing on them, the realization that the war gave them not just wages but purpose. And now peace, ironically, is taking it away. Historians argue about whether this shift happened by design or inertia, whether propaganda gently pushed women back into kitchens, or whether the machinery of society simply defaulted to its old rhythm. But the truth, standing here in the frost of 1945, feels less like politics and more like gravity. Everything returning to its prescribed place, even when the people who filled those places have changed beyond recognition. You follow one woman as she walks home through a narrow alley lined with laundry, frozen stiff on the lines, the cloth snapping gently in the wind like brittle flags of surrender. She carries her lunch pail dented and empty, and as she passes a window she catches her own reflection, a face both proud and tired, a stranger she has come to respect, and for a fleeting second she allows herself to smile, not at what was lost, but at what was proven possible. Inside her small house, the smell of soap and starch replaces the scent of grease and metal. An iron sits on the table, hissing faintly as she smooths her husband's shirts. On the wall above hangs a framed photograph of her in her factory uniform, her expression fierce, her eyes bright, her shoulders squared, and she touches the edge of the frame with one finger, just to remind herself that it happened, that she was once that woman. Her teenage daughter watches from the doorway, pretending not to stare, but she sees everything, the posture, the silence, the way her mother presses each seam with exact precision, as though ironing is just another kind of labor worth mastering. And in that moment, the girl inherits a secret kind of knowledge, that a woman's strength can live quietly inside the shape of ordinary gestures. Farther down the street, in another small building, a group of women sits around a wooden table in what used to be the break room of the assembly floor, now turned into a meeting space for the local union. They drink weak coffee from tin mugs, passing a single newspaper among them, its headline promising a bright future that none of them can quite picture. One woman, older than the rest, reads aloud about a return to normalcy and laughs softly, the sound half amusement, half despair, because she knows that normal never included them. Another speaks of staying active in the union, of fighting for fair wages and training for the younger girls who might still want to work. but her voice trembles when she admits she doesn't know how long the hall will stay open, now that membership is dwindling. The others listen, nodding slowly, their faces illuminated by the dull winter light coming through the window, and you can feel the tension in the room, hope and fatigue sitting side by side like two people who no longer speak but cannot part. Outside, the streets hum softly with transition. Shop windows begin to sparkle again with domestic displays. Aprons, cookware, polished irons, advertisements whispering that happiness can once more be found in spotless kitchens and obedient comfort. And in these glass reflections, the women see their new assignments mapped out as clearly as if written in orders. Some accept it, because exhaustion makes resistance seem like luxury. Others bristle silently, carrying their pride like a hidden weapon tucked beneath their ribs. They have touched machinery, wielded tools, led crews, signed paychecks, and tasted the solid flavor of independence. And though the world now asks them to forget, forgetting is not something they are built for. In a small apartment nearby, a young mother balances her baby on one hip while counting her change at the grocery counter. She worked in a shipyard during the war, loved the rhythm of the engines and the certainty of the paycheck, but her hours were cut the day the armistice was announced. Her husband, back from the Pacific with a limp and a distant look in his eyes, sleeps most afternoons, unable to find work or rest. She stares at the canned goods, choosing carefully, her fingers tracing prices written in chalk, and for a moment you see her shoulders sag before she catches herself and stands straighter, because surrender is something she doesn't know how to perform anymore. And everywhere you look, these small moments repeat: women at bus stops with faces turned toward the wind, women in offices typing quietly, while the men around them relearn the authority of their voices, women kneeling beside radios late at night, listening for job announcements, their children asleep beside them, the room filled with the faint hum of ambition held in check. The war has ended, but a different kind of battle continues, one fought not with weapons or uniforms, but with patience, dignity, and memory. As evening settles over the town, you see porch lights flickering to life one by one, each one a tiny signal against the dark. Some of the women sit by sewing machines again, repairing old clothes. Others rest with their feet tucked under blankets, their hands idle for the first time in years, their thoughts wandering through what they've built and what has been taken from them. The factories are quieter now, but if you listen closely, you can still hear something faint humming in the air. Not machinery, but memory itself, the echo of their work refusing to fade. And you understand then that history will remember their faces only in black and white photographs and cheerful slogans. But what truly remains is this soft undercurrent beneath the American winter of 1945, a quiet army of women who carried the weight of a nation. And though they have been told to stop, something inside them keeps moving, steady and unyielding, like the sound of a machine cooling after a long, extraordinary shift. You walk now into the echoing heart of December 1945, a train station so alive with motion that the air itself seems to tremble, a cavern of iron and steam where the entire nation is gathered in transit, everyone going somewhere, everyone trying to arrive at a version of home that may no longer exist. The platforms are a blur of wool coats, duffel bags, children perched on luggage, and clouds of white breath rising toward rafters, blackened with soot, and above it all hangs the sharp, metallic music of whistles and shouting, the rhythm of engines sighing against the cold. After years of discipline and silence, America suddenly has too many voices, too many footsteps, too much heart beating in one place, and the sound is both exhilarating and strange, the sound of peace trying to find its tempo. Steam curls around your legs as a locomotive exhales heavily beside you, and through the mist you see the silhouettes of soldiers in great coats, their shoulders squared by habit, their eyes scanning the crowd not for danger, but for faces they've dreamed of across oceans. One young man stands perfectly still, his fingers gripping the strap of his duffel bag, his gaze locked on the clock above the ticket booth as though sheer concentration could bend the minute hand forward. Another soldier laughs too loudly, his arm thrown over a friend's shoulder, his voice filled with the reckless relief of survival, while a third stares down at his boots, tracing the stains he will never wash away. Beside them, mothers crane their necks, children wave small American flags, and newspaper vendors weave between the masses, shouting headlines about troop arrivals, peace conferences, and shortages of everything except hope. Historians record that in the winter of 1945 the railroads carried more passengers than at any time in the country's history, millions of servicemen and civilians traveling at once. And you can feel that pressure now, the vibration under your feet as if the rails themselves are straining beneath the weight of reunion. The air tastes of coal smoke and perfume and damp wool, of exhaustion mixed with anticipation. And when the loudspeaker crackles with a garbled announcement, the entire hall pauses, hearts stopping in unison, waiting for their city to be named. Near one pillar a soldier stands apart, his cap tilted low, a folded letter in his hand, the paper worn soft from being read too often. He's headed home to someone he hasn't heard from in weeks, and the silence of that distance gnaws at him in a way bullets never could. He watches a young couple embrace on the opposite platform, their reunion spilling into tears and laughter and awkward kisses, and he looks away ashamed of his envy. In another corner, a sailor leans against a vending machine counting his change, deciding between a newspaper and a candy bar, and when he finally chooses the candy he unwraps it with reverence, because chocolate, after years of scarcity, feels almost holy. A small historical detail tucked into trade records notes that caramel and chocolate bars vanished from shelves in hours during that season, snatched up by soldiers who craved the taste of something uncomplicated, something sweet enough to erase the memory of rations and powder. The crowd surges as a train whistles in the distance, the long, mournful note rolling through the station like thunder softened by snow. Steam floods the platform, white and shimmering, and faces blur behind it, but you can sense the energy, the collective inhalation of people poised at the edge of arrival. A girl clutching a bouquet of winter greenery stands near the steps, her scarf pulled high over her mouth, and when the first passengers appear she goes up on her toes, scanning every uniform, her eyes darting from one face to another, until finally she spots him. Her shoulders drop, her lips part, and for a moment everything else, the shouting, the engines, the announcements, dissolves. They move toward each other with the slowness of disbelief, as if they're afraid to break the spell by walking too quickly. When they finally meet, they don't speak, they just breathe the same air again, their foreheads touching, steam swirling around them like a benediction. You walk through the waiting room now, where benches overflow with people caught in the long pause between departure and arrival. A woman knits furiously, her needles clacking like distant typewriters, and beside her sits her teenage son, fidgeting with a paper cup of coffee that smells weak but comforting. Across from them, an old couple shares a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, their gloved hands trembling as they unwrap it. They've been waiting for their granddaughter to return from naval service, and every whistle makes them flinch with hope. Children chase each other between suitcases, their laughter sharp and pure, cutting through the fatigue that hangs over the room. A conductor passes, his voice rough from shouting all day, reminding everyone to keep their luggage close, and for a moment when you look around, you realize that every single person here is carrying more than a bag. They are carrying years of interruption, of longing, of suspended sentences finally about to finish. In the corner, a group of soldiers sits in a semicircle on the floor, their boots unlaced, their eyes heavy with sleep. One of them plays a harmonica softly, the tune uneven but full of heart, and the sound drifts upward into the rafters, blending with the hum of the crowd. The song is half lullaby, half lament, a melody that seems to know that joy and grief often share the same space. People stop to listen, smiling faintly, and for a few minutes the station becomes something almost sacred, a temporary cathedral of tired travelers bound together by a single song. The clock strikes 7. Somewhere in the distance a whistle calls again, and the spell breaks. Announcements echo through the hall. Chicago, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, St. Louis. Each name a key unlocking tears, laughter, movement. Soldiers rise, families follow, waves of humanity sweeping toward the platforms. You drift with them, carried by the tide of motion, feeling the pull of thousands of hearts heading home all at once. The floor vibrates beneath your feet, and through the fog of breath and steam you glimpse the faces pressed to train windows, some weeping, some smiling, some simply staring out, memorizing the sight of a country whole again. The train begins to move, slow at first, wheels clattering like distant applause, and people on the platform wave until their arms ache. For a moment you could swear that the station itself breathes, inhaling the joy and exhaling the ache of farewell. Snow falls lightly outside, dusting the tracks in white, and as the last car disappears into the night, the sound lingers, a metallic heartbeat fading into distance, the sound of America learning once more how to leave and how to return. And when the steam clears, the station feels softer, emptied but not silent, as though it is holding its breath before the next train arrives. Somewhere a child laughs. Somewhere else a man wipes his eyes and tells himself he's just tired. The war is over, but its echo is not. It travels on these rails, folded into every whistle, every vibration, every letter written home from the rattling seat of a train. And as you stand there watching the lamps flicker against the drifting snow, you understand that this movement, this endless arriving and departing, is what peace looks like when it first begins to move again, fragile and magnificent, like a nation relearning the rhythm of its own heartbeat. You leave the train station behind and step out into the kind of cold that stings the skin gently but cleanly, the air bright with snowlight and the faint smell of coal fires burning somewhere far away, and before you stretches a small American town wrapped in the glow of street lamps and Christmas storefronts, the world rebuilt in miniature after the chaos of the years before. The roads are quiet, paved with slush that reflects every lamp like melted silver, and you can almost hear the snow landing, that small, crisp sound that only happens in the hours after the world decides to rest. This is the America that soldiers dreamed of, the one that mothers prayed for, the one that somehow waited patiently through blackouts and telegrams, and now with the war behind it, it breathes again, carefully, like something afraid to startle its own peace. You walk past the diner first, a squat building of chrome and glass, its windows fogged with the warmth of frying bacon and the clink of coffee cups. And inside, the world looks as though it never left. A jukebox hums softly in the corner, spinning a record too slow from overuse, and at the counter sits a line of figures, a farmer in a wool cap, a young woman in a red scarf, a soldier still in uniform with his duffel bag between his boots. The waitress pours coffee without asking who wants it. She already knows. Behind her the griddle hisses and the smell of butter fills the air, and the conversations that drift through the diner are small but steady. Talk about weather, about trains delayed by snow, about who got home and who didn't yet. Every word carries that tentative kindness people use when they are still healing, the tone of a nation learning to speak softly again. Farther down the street, a shop window glows with decorations that shimmer faintly beneath the frost. A cardboard Santa leans slightly forward, his smile a little too wide, surrounded by toys arranged with a sense of hope more than wealth. A few wooden dolls, a small train, a shiny red sled, a paper sign that reads "Buy early, supplies are limited." A clerk in a wool vest stands just behind the glass, rearranging things with care, pausing to dust off a model airplane, his reflection merging with the toys in the window until he looks like part of the display. A man suspended between selling dreams and remembering what they cost. On the sidewalk, two children press their noses to the glass, their breath fogging the view, and the younger one whispers that she hopes Santa still remembers how to find them after the war. Her brother nods solemnly, the way only a child who has overheard too much can nod, and they stand there a while longer, unwilling to move from the soft warmth of that imagined world. Across the street, the movie theatre marquee glows weakly, its bulbs flickering in uneven rhythm, spelling out the words Holiday Inn, Couples huddle under coats, tickets clutched in their mittens, and when the doors open, a burst of warm air escapes, carrying with it the faint scent of popcorn and the laughter of people rediscovering what it feels like to sit in the dark and dream together. Inside, when the song White Christmas begins, you can almost feel the entire audience exhale, because that dream of snow and home and peace feels less like fantasy and more like an answered prayer. Some wipe their eyes quietly, others hum along. Outside, the snow keeps falling as if it understands the choreography. The hardware store window displays lanterns and tools polished to a shine, a sign reading "Back to work, back to building," and standing just inside is a man in rolled-up sleeves checking his ledgers, one hand resting absent-mindedly on a stack of nails. His son, maybe 12, sits beside the counter reading a comic book, the bright colors reflected in his glasses, and the man glances over at him every few minutes with a small, quiet pride that needs no words. The bell above the door rings occasionally, a farmer needing wire, a mother asking for a snow shovel, and every exchange is brief but human, as if politeness has become a way of blessing each other for having made it this far. Down the block, the barbershop glows like a little lantern in the cold. The red and white pole turns slowly in the window, and inside a few men linger, not for haircuts but for warmth and talk. They discuss the news, rationing lifted here, strikes breaking out there, some politician promising a brighter tomorrow, and though none of them quite believe in politicians anymore, they nod anyway because nodding feels easier than arguing. Someone mentions that the town might build a new community hall now that the war bonds are finally paid off, and the thought alone brings a flicker of light into their tired eyes. Outside, their reflections in the window merge with the glow of Christmas lights, creating the illusion that the whole town is one long chain of warmth linked together by glass and memory. At the far end of Main Street stands the church, its steeple dusted in snow, the bells silent for now, but ready to ring at midnight mass. Through the stained glass windows you see the faint glow of candles, the figures of people kneeling, their heads bowed not in despair but in gratitude too deep for words. The organ plays softly, the melody spilling out into the night like a gentle breath, and as you pass, you catch a fragment of the hymn, "Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. For a moment everything truly is." You pause at the corner, watching snow gather on the empty trolley tracks, and you realize how different this stillness is from the wartime silence, not fearful, not waiting, but peaceful in its imperfection. America is scarred, tired, uncertain, yet somehow alive, and this little town with its flickering bulbs and uneven sidewalks feels like a heartbeat echoing through the cold. The lights from shop windows spill onto the snow in rectangles of gold, and the footprints of passers-by fill slowly with white until the world looks untouched again. Somewhere a door opens, laughter spills out, and for the first time in years it doesn't sound fragile. It just sounds human, and as you walk through the falling snow, you understand that this is where peace truly begins. Not in treaties or parades, but in small towns like this, where the air smells of coffee and pine and iron, where the streets hum quietly with survival, and where people, despite everything, have remembered how to hang wreaths in windows, and believe that light, even a weak flickering one, is still worth keeping lit through the long American winter. By now the country has settled into that strange, exhausted calm that follows great storms, and in the small wooden houses scattered across every state, the sound of pens scratching on paper fills the nights like the soft ticking of clocks, because this Christmas, more than any before it, belongs to letters. The war had taught people how to write as though words were lifelines, and even now, with peace restored, the habit endures. Letters to sons stationed overseas in the occupation zones, to husbands looking for work, to brothers still travelling home by train, to friends met in the chaos of service who now live 1,000 miles away. The kitchen tables where these letters are written are simple, oil lamps flickering, cups of coffee cooling, envelopes stacked neatly beside ration book leftovers, but the emotion that seeps into the ink feels monumental, as if every line carries the weight of survival. A mother sits alone near the window, her glasses slipping down her nose, the paper before her covered in slow, deliberate script. She is writing to her eldest son, now stationed in Germany, and she begins by telling him about the weather, about how the snow fell early this year, and how the old maple behind the barn finally split in the wind. She writes about his younger brother who fixed the roof without complaint, about the neighbor's cow that calved in the storm, about the church choir practicing "O Come All Ye Faithful," their voices carrying through the frozen air. She pauses, pen hovering, before adding the part that matters most, that his father still doesn't speak much, but he listens to the radio every night at 6, and always nods when the news says the word peace. She ends the letter not with love, but with "come home soon," sealing it carefully, pressing the flap closed as if to keep her own heartbeat inside. In a city apartment miles away, a young wife sits by a radiator wrapped in a shawl that still smells faintly of her husband's uniform. The room is small, the walls thin, but her desk is covered with photos. Him smiling from the deck of a ship, him standing awkwardly with a friend, him wearing that crooked grin that she still dreams about. She writes to him every Sunday, even though he hasn't yet replied, and tonight's letter is full of domestic detail. The neighbor's baby, the broken light bulb, the new job she might take at the sewing factory. But as she writes, her sentences grow longer, heavier, until they no longer describe the world around her but the world she wants to return to. She tells him she still sets 2 plates on the table, that she hums to the radio when the loneliness gets too loud, that she has learned to sleep on only one side of the bed so his place stays warm when he finally comes back. When she finishes, she signs her name twice, once neatly and once beneath it, smaller, as though whispering it. In another town, an old man sits at his desk, his hands trembling slightly, as he writes a letter not to someone far away, but to someone gone. He addresses it carefully to his son's name, and folds it anyway, placing it in a drawer with the others. His wife pretends not to notice, but she leaves a candle burning in the window every night. For them, the act of writing is not hope but remembrance, a way of keeping conversation alive with the dead. Across America, drawers like his are filling up, quiet archives of grief disguised as correspondence, love letters sent to the unreachable. Children write too, in crayon and crooked handwriting, their letters to Santa full of modest wishes, a pair of mittens, a candy bar, a toy car if supply ships arrive in time. The older ones, who've seen too much through open newspapers and overheard whispers, ask instead for things that sound suspiciously like prayers. Please make Daddy come home soon. Please make Mommy stop crying. Please make everything like before. The mailmen, trudging through snow and slush, know these letters by feel, lighter than ordinary envelopes, but heavy in a different way, and they deliver them with quiet reverence, as if aware that the mailbags they carry contain the pulse of an entire nation. Some letters arrive late, traveling halfway across oceans from bases in Okinawa, Manila, Naples. The handwriting is hurried, the words blunt but aching with longing. I can't believe it's Christmas again. Don't wait up. Save me a slice of pie. I'll be home soon, maybe February. Love you, kid. When these letters reach their destinations weeks later, the recipients still read them by lamplight, holding the paper to their chests as though it could transmit warmth through skin and time. The envelopes smell faintly of salt, oil, and ink, and when opened, the air around them changes. The room feels smaller, quieter, suddenly alive with the sound of a voice that isn't really there. On a farm in Kansas, a woman writes to her sister in California, telling her that the wheat crop is thin but the soil still good, that the new baby is strong, that the men who came back seem older than their years. She mentions how the town held a Christmas pageant last night, and that half the choir sang through tears, not because of sadness, but because the silence of the previous Decembers was finally broken. She ends her letter with a line that feels like something bigger than family. We are all still here, and somehow that feels like a miracle. And somewhere in all this, across cities and small towns, Across lonely rooms and crowded kitchens, the country becomes a kind of paper landscape. Millions of folded sheets crossing miles of track and ocean, thousands of hands sealing envelopes with breath, an entire generation learning how to speak tenderness into existence. After years of speaking only in orders and telegrams, the letters connect the far corners of America like threads in a quilt, fragile but strong enough to hold warmth. On Christmas Eve, the post offices close early. The last trains carry the last sacks of mail through the snow. In those final deliveries, the clerks and drivers know they are carrying more than paper. They are carrying proof that people still believe in the act of reaching out. By nightfall, every small town is lit from within, kitchens glowing, windows frosted, and on tables everywhere lie envelopes, opened and reread, their creases soft from fingers tracing familiar names. Outside, snow falls steadily, covering the world in a silence so complete it feels like forgiveness, and inside, the letters, thousands of them, millions of them, whisper the same truth in 100 different ways that love, when written down, can outlast even war. The night settles over the country like a blanket of velvet frost, and for the first time in almost a decade, the darkness feels kind, no longer watchful, no longer something to be feared, but soft and sheltering, filled with the quiet hum of safety. The streets are pale with snow that crunches under the occasional footstep. The houses glow faintly from within, and somewhere far away a church bell rings, its sound rolling across the fields like a low, steady heartbeat, reminding everyone who hears it that time, finally, is moving gently again. In towns and cities, in farms and tenements, across plains and coasts, the world that fought and rationed and grieved now pauses, not to celebrate extravagance, but to marvel at the ordinary miracle of being alive when so many are not. Inside one home, a family gathers around a small tree whose needles catch the light of the fire like threads of gold. The ornaments are mismatched, some glass, some paper, one carved from a piece of scrap wood that a father brought back from overseas. On the mantel sits a single photograph of a man in uniform, his smile confident and far away, and though his chair at the table is empty, his presence fills the room like warmth itself. The mother leads the prayer before dinner, her voice steady but soft, thanking God not for victory or glory, but for enough food, enough light, enough hope to last through another winter. The children listen in silence, their faces glowing in the flicker of the candles, their eyelids heavy with the kind of peace that belongs only to those too young to remember what it replaced. In the kitchen, a pie cools on the windowsill, its crust uneven but golden, the scent of cinnamon and apples drifting through the air, mingling with the sound of the radio where Bing Crosby's voice hums faintly. "I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams." The song floats through the rooms like a ghost of longing turned gentle, and in house after house across the country, people stop for a moment to listen. A widow resting her hand on a folded letter, a young soldier staring at a photograph, an old man looking out through frosted glass, each of them quietly understanding that the line between dream and memory has never been thinner than it is tonight. In another town, the church is full for the first time in years. Candles line the pews, their flames trembling slightly in the draughts that creep under the old wooden doors. The choir stands in the loft, voices hushed at first, then rising together with a strength that feels both ancient and new. The congregation sings Silent Night, and when the verse reaches the words "Sleep in heavenly peace," something happens that no one expected. People stop singing, overcome not by sadness, but by the sudden realization that the words are true. Peace, the kind that once felt unreachable, is here, fragile and real, resting in the air like breath made visible. Tears shimmer on faces that have learned how to hide emotion, and in that small country church, every candle flame seems to lean inward, listening. Outside, snowflakes drift past the stained glass windows, glowing red and blue as they fall through the colored light. The world smells faintly of pine, wool, smoke and bread, the simple sense of survival turned holy by memory. In the distance, a train whistle sounds, not mournful this time, but low and steady, as if echoing the rhythm of the hymn. Somewhere along the tracks, soldiers sleep against cold windows, heading home through the night, their dreams filled with kitchens, porches, and the faces waiting for them at dawn. Back in the towns, porch lights burn like stars. Some families have strung bulbs along fences. Others have placed candles in every window, the small flames turning snowbanks into rivers of gold. The air is still enough to hear laughter travel down the street, the sudden, unguarded kind that people had forgotten how to make, and dogs bark softly as if trying not to disturb it. At one window, an old woman sits with a cat on her lap, knitting slowly, her needles catching the firelight. In another, a boy writes one last letter to his father stationed overseas, promising to be good next year, promising to keep the snowman standing until he comes home. Every window tells a story, and every story tonight feels like part of the same prayer whispered across the land. Let it stay quiet just a little longer. Midnight comes quietly. The church bells ring again, and their sound moves through the towns, echoing off the hills, carried on the cold air to every field, every river, every sleeping farm. People pause wherever they are, in kitchens, in bedrooms, on porches holding mugs of coffee, and for a moment the entire country seems to breathe in unison. The war has ended, the world has tilted back toward light, and even those who cannot sleep rest easier, knowing that somewhere, beneath this same sky, millions of strangers are doing the same thing, listening, hoping, remembering. And if you step outside now, if you lift your face to the snow and close your eyes, you can almost hear it. Not noise, not even music, but the soft, endless murmur of a world learning to dream again. The wind moves through the trees, the bells fade, and the snow keeps falling, gentle, steady, infinite, as though heaven itself is exhaling over the quiet heart of 1945. The first light of morning comes slow and silvery, sliding over rooftops still heavy with snow, slipping through frost-rimmed windows and landing in soft patches across kitchen floors that smell faintly of coffee, wood smoke, and yesterday's pine needles. It is Christmas morning in America, December 25th, 1945, the first one to belong wholly to peace, and everywhere the air feels different, thinner, clearer, trembling faintly with a kind of quiet joy that people no longer need to ration. The war has ended, but the world is still learning what peace means, and so the morning moves carefully. Each sound, a door opening, a kettle whistling, a child's gasp, carrying more meaning than it should. In one small house on the edge of town, a mother stands at the stove, stirring oatmeal that bubbles in the pot like a heartbeat, and behind her two children wait by the tree, their legs bouncing, their eyes wide, whispering guesses about what the packages might hold. The gifts are modest: a doll sewn from scraps of fabric, a carved wooden truck, a single orange in each stocking. But the room feels radiant with excitement, because it is not about the gifts themselves. It is about the act of being allowed to hope again. The mother turns, wiping her hands on her apron, smiling despite the exhaustion carved gently into her face. And when the children tear the paper from their presents, the sound is soft, not frantic, as though they already understand that joy must be handled gently in this new, fragile world. Next door, a veteran wakes early, out of habit more than need, his body tuned to a rhythm that no longer exists. For a moment he does not know where he is. The stillness feels strange, too vast. But then the scent of bread baking reaches him from the kitchen, and he exhales, grounding himself in the ordinary miracle of it. His wife hums quietly as she sets the table, and when he enters, still in his undershirt, she looks up, and for a heartbeat sees both the boy she married and the man the war returned to her, two faces layered together by time. He sits, awkward at first, unsure if peace allows silence, and then she pours him coffee, and he reaches for her hand, and neither of them needs to speak. Outside, the neighbor's radio plays Bing Crosby again, and for once, the lyrics sound less like longing and more like truth. Across the country, similar mornings unfold. In cities, in farms, in quiet rooms above shops, some families gather around radios to hear the president's holiday message, his voice careful, paternal, steady as a metronome. Others turn the dial to music, letting the sound of carols fill the empty spaces that used to belong to fear. Children run through hallways in wool socks, dogs bark at the commotion, and every so often someone laughs so hard that they have to sit down, their bodies startled by the weight of happiness. On every table sits something warm: eggs, biscuits, leftover stew, and the clatter of forks and spoons feels like applause for the simple fact that this meal does not have to be stretched, shared, or justified by ration stamps. In a small apartment in Chicago, an elderly woman writes in her journal by the window, her pen moving slowly, her handwriting looping like lace. She notes the weather, clear, snow still falling lightly, and then adds, "It feels strange not to be afraid." On the next line she writes, "I miss my brother," then stops, pressing the pen to the paper until the ink pools, and finally adds, "But maybe he is part of this piece too." She closes the book, wipes her eyes, and watches the street below as a group of children drag a sled through the snow, their laughter echoing between the buildings like bells. For her, and for millions like her, the absence of war has become its own kind of company. In another corner of America, a father carries a box down from the attic, dusty and battered, marked with army issue numbers. Inside are medals, letters, and photographs, all of which he sets carefully on the table before his children wake. When they join him, he tells them stories, not of battle, but of the men he met, the jokes they told, the nights they sang to keep the dark away. He does not mention fear or death. He leaves those out of the story, perhaps for their sake, perhaps for his. The children listen, wide-eyed, and when he finishes, his daughter asks if she can hold one of the medals. He nods, and when she pins it to her dress, everyone laughs, the sound spilling into the morning like sunlight breaking through frost. Outside, the town stirs slowly awake. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin, steady lines. Bells ring again, not for warning, not for mourning, but for welcome. Neighbors exchange greetings at their fences, holding mugs of coffee between mittened hands. Someone shovels a driveway. Someone else carries a pie to the widow 2 houses down. The air smells of pine and coal and faint sweetness, and every sound, the scrape of a shovel, the creak of a gate, the crunch of snow under boots, becomes part of a quiet national symphony of contentment. The postman, making his last rounds, tucks a few straggling envelopes into mailboxes and waves to children, building snowmen in front yards, each one crowned with a battered old army cap, because play and memory have fused into one. At noon, sunlight catches on icicles hanging from porch roofs, turning them into prisms that scatter light across the snow. Inside, radio announcers speak of reconstruction, of new beginnings, of the promise of an economy ready to grow again. And yet their voices sound softer, humbled, as though everyone knows that what matters this morning cannot be counted in dollars or production. It is measured in breathing, in the sound of forks against plates, in the way people look at each other and finally, quietly, believe they have a future. As afternoon drifts in, some families walk to the park, pulling sleds and carrying thermoses of cocoa, and for the first time in years, laughter echoes across open fields without fear of being silenced. Veterans lean against fences, smoking in contentment, talking little but smiling more, their eyes bright under the brim of their hats. Couples stroll hand in hand, leaving long tracks in the snow that vanish behind them with every new gust of wind, as if the earth itself is eager to erase the old footprints and let them begin again. By evening, the sky turns violet, and windows glow one by one, the entire town flickering to life like a constellation reborn. The smell of dinners fills the air: roast, bread, chocolate, coffee, the smells of return and of rest. Radios hum softly, children grow drowsy by the fire, and the world, weary and grateful, settles back into the rhythm it almost forgot. Christmas of 1945 ends, not with parades or speeches, but with this, the sound of quiet forks, the sigh of full bellies, the deep, slow breathing of people who for the first time in so long are not dreaming of peace but living it. And outside, in that final calm before nightfall, the snow keeps falling, slow, steady, tender, covering rooftops, fences, letters, and footprints, until all of America lies under one endless white blanket, and the air hums with something so gentle, so absolute, that you cannot quite name it, except to say that it feels like grace. Dusk settles with a hush that feels older than sound itself, the kind of twilight that seems to stretch time rather than end it. And as lamps flicker on across America, the color of the world shifts from silver to gold, from the glitter of day to the glow of memory. The snow outside deepens, catching the last threads of light until every rooftop and fence post gleams like something touched by grace. And through half-frozen windows you can see families moving slowly, tidying dishes, folding blankets, and leaning closer to one another, as if afraid to let the quiet drift away too soon. The radio hums softly in nearly every home, that warm, steady pulse of the nation, still knitting itself back together, and the voices coming through the static sound almost like old friends returning after too long a silence, announcers reading poems about homecomings, singers whose melodies wander gently through the air like prayers that forgot to end. In one living room, an elderly couple sits in front of a fireplace whose embers glow faintly red, their chairs angled slightly toward each other in a habit so natural they no longer notice it. The man holds a newspaper on his lap, but he hasn't turned a page in hours. Instead, he stares at the headline about post-war rebuilding and thinks not of factories or cities, but of the strange, small rebuilding happening right there in his own house. The way laughter sounds less foreign now, the way he no longer startles when the doorbell rings at night. His wife knits with slow, practiced rhythm, her needles tapping like distant rain, and when she pauses to look up, the light catches her spectacles, and for a heartbeat the whole room looks like it's breathing. A few streets away, a young couple sits by a phonograph spinning an old record, its surface scratched but still willing to sing. The man, home from overseas, closes his eyes as the music begins, and for the first time in months feels his body unclench. He doesn't talk about the war, not tonight, maybe not ever, but he listens to the song as though it contains the language he's lost, the one that used to let him tell her what he felt before words became too heavy to carry. She leans her head against his shoulder, and for a long time neither of them moves. The record ends with a faint hiss, a soft whisper that fills the room with peace so fragile it almost hurts. Elsewhere, a widow sits near the window of a boarding house, the lights of the street reflected in her teacup. On the table beside her lies a small wooden box containing her husband's last letters, the paper folded and refolded until the edges have gone thin. She reads them not to remember him, but to remember herself, the version of her that existed when the words were new. Outside, the town is quiet except for the muffled laughter of a group of teenagers trudging through snow, their voices bright and unafraid. She smiles at the sound, letting it warm her more than the tea ever could. And in that moment she understands that grief has softened, not vanished, but learned how to sit quietly beside gratitude, without either one dissolving. In a farmhouse miles away, a family gathers around the kitchen table long after dinner, the only light coming from a single oil lamp whose flame wavers every time someone breathes too close. The father reads aloud from a letter his brother sent from the Pacific, the one that arrived too late for Thanksgiving but just in time for Christmas, and the children listen wide-eyed, picturing ships and palm trees and stars that look different from the ones above their own roof. When he finishes, no one speaks for a moment. Then the youngest, a girl with braids undone, asks if her uncle is lonely out there. The father folds the letter carefully and says, "Maybe, but not tonight." The girl nods solemnly as though she understands more than her years should allow, and the mother, eyes shining, rises to refill everyone's cocoa before it cools. The night grows deeper, and one by one the radios fall silent. The programs fade, the laughter ends, and the air fills with that tender, unclaimed stillness that exists, only when a day has truly given all it had to give. Outside, street lamps stand like patient sentinels, their halos of light stretching over empty sidewalks. Snow continues to drift lazily down, brushing against window panes, piling softly on fences, erasing footprints with the slow gentleness of forgiveness. Somewhere, a train whistles in the distance, not in farewell now, but in benediction, a long, low note that seems to say rest. It's over, it's safe to dream again. Inside, people begin to drift toward bed, soldiers home and half believing it. Parents who finally allow themselves to sleep without fear. Children clutching toys too precious to set aside. The houses breathe, settling into warmth, into silence, into the rhythm of a peace that does not yet feel ordinary, but someday will. And if you could rise above the towns and farms and rivers, if you could look down upon the country as it sleeps, you would see the faint pulse of light from every window, scattered across the snow like a constellation drawn by human hands. A map of hope, fragile but bright, flickering through the last hours of a year that began in war and ends in grace. And somewhere, perhaps in one of those homes, perhaps in all of them, someone looks out into the falling snow and whispers a line that no one else hears. Not a prayer, not a wish, but something simpler, softer. Thank you for letting it be quiet. Morning arrives with the sound of quiet wheels on snow, of milk bottles clinking against wooden steps, of wind rattling a loose shutter, and then settling again, as if even the weather understands that this first day of the new year must move gently. The world outside is pale and shimmering, every field covered in frost that catches the light like powdered glass, every road stretching forward with a sense of cautious invitation. Inside the homes of America, people stir slowly, not with the rush of routine, but with the hesitant grace of those learning to live again after long absence. The clocks tick with unhurried confidence, the radios hum softly to life, and across the nation there rises a shared exhale, the deep collective sigh of a country, realizing that it has made it through the night. In one small kitchen, a man stands by the window holding a cup of coffee that has gone cold in his hands, watching as the sunlight drips down the icicles like slow gold. His uniform jacket still hangs by the door, but his wife has placed a sprig of evergreen in its pocket, a small promise that this year will belong not to duty but to home. Behind him, their children chase each other around the table, their laughter thin and high, almost too bright for the quiet morning. He listens, still and reverent, feeling how the sound fills the spaces in his chest that used to echo with gunfire and engines. For the first time in years, he does not feel out of place in his own house. The walls, the chairs, the clock, everything has softened to make room for him again. In a city apartment, a young woman hangs her laundry near the window, the steam from the kettle fogging the glass until the skyline disappears. She hums as she works, a song she half remembers from the radio, and when she pauses to wipe the window with her sleeve, she catches sight of a banner stretched across a shop below. Welcome 1946, a year for renewal. The words look brave and uncertain, like a smile held too long, but she smiles anyway because believing in renewal is half the work of making it real. Behind her on the kitchen table lies a letter she has not yet answered, from a friend overseas, full of plans about school, jobs, and dreams of buying a small car. She reads the letter again, and then folds it slowly, pressing her palm over the paper, as if to seal the future into it. Out in the countryside, farms wake to the sound of roosters and creaking barns. The air smells of hay and wood smoke and new beginnings. Farmers step outside bundled in heavy coats, their boots crunching against the snow, their breath turning to mist in the cold air. They pause at the edge of fields still frozen and think about spring, about the planting to come, about the tractors that will return to work instead of war. Some of them still wear the uniforms beneath their overalls, not out of pride but because it feels strange to shed them completely. When the wind passes over the open land, it carries no sound but its own, no engines, no distant thunder, no echo of fear, only the rustle of frost breaking under the first light of morning. In the towns, shopkeepers unlock doors that haven't seen much business in months. A hardware store owner sweeps snow from his steps and arranges a small sign in the window. Tools for building, not for breaking. Down the street, the baker kneads dough with a rhythm that feels ceremonial, the smell of yeast rising like hope itself. A few customers wander in, still half asleep, wishing each other Happy New Year with voices that sound both surprised and shy, as if saying the words out loud might scare the fragile peace away. At the corner post office, a clerk stacks bundles of mail, their brown paper damp with condensation, each envelope a small reminder that connection has survived distance. He hums under his breath, an old marching tune that no longer belongs to war, and the sound fills the space between the walls like sunlight does after storm. At the train stations, soldiers continue to arrive, slower now, in smaller waves, carrying fewer bags and more silence. Families wait with bouquets of evergreens instead of flags, and when the trains pull in, the reunions are quieter, the embraces longer. The great engine exhales steam, and through it you can see faces finding each other again, eyes wet, hands trembling, the kind of reunion that doesn't need words. Some step off the platform and look around as if testing the solidity of the earth. They have crossed oceans, but this small patch of frozen ground feels like the true continent they fought for. Ordinary, unremarkable, home. As afternoon settles in, the light turns warm and low, spilling through windows like honey. People begin to write again. Lists, plans, resolutions, none grand, all human. Find work, learn to dance again. Visit my sister, grow tomatoes in the spring. On radios, announcers speak of rebuilding Europe, of new technologies, of cautious optimism, their voices crisp with purpose. And yet what most listeners hear beneath those words is simpler. The invitation to live without fear, to rebuild not just nations but mornings, dinners, laughter. Every ticking clock feels like an act of defiance against chaos. Every heartbeat an unspoken vow. We're still here. By evening the frost returns, tracing white feathers along every window pane. Lamps glow in houses large and small, casting the same golden pattern of domestic light, a pattern that stretches from coast to coast, from the cold shores of Maine to the distant hills of California. The country hums with small sounds, the whir of sewing machines, the scratch of pens, the clink of dishes washed after supper. It is an orchestra of ordinary life, and after so much noise its quietness feels sacred. And when night finally descends, the last of the holiday lights still twinkle along porches and rooftops, reflections trembling in the snowdrifts below. The wind carries the faint smell of pine and chimney smoke, and if you stand outside and listen closely, you might almost hear it. The sound of a world learning to breathe again, of hearts remembering rhythm, of souls finding their way back to warmth. The war is over, the year is new, and though nothing is certain yet, one truth moves gently beneath the surface of everything. Peace is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to love the quiet after it. And so, as midnight comes to claim the last hour of the first peaceful New Year's Day, America, weary, grateful, luminous, lies beneath its winter sky like a sleeping giant wrapped in snow, its dreams steady, its pulse slow, its future unfolding quietly, one heartbeat at a time. Night has returned, but it is no longer the kind that hides things. It is a tender, generous night, the kind that holds instead of haunts. Across the vastness of America, from the frozen harbors of Maine to the quiet plains of Kansas, from the glowing cities to the dark edges of the Pacific, the land lies wrapped in snow, breathing evenly beneath a sky so clear that every star seems new. The war that once filled every silence with fear has faded now into memory, leaving behind an emptiness that feels not hollow but clean, like the air after rain. The country sleeps, not in triumph, not in forgetfulness, but in relief, and that relief is heavy, immense, but strangely gentle, like a great ship finally docked after years at sea. If you could drift above it, above the towns with their blinking porch lights, above the farmlands dusted in white, above the steel rivers and the sleeping railways that carried so many home, you would see a pattern of light that looks almost deliberate, as though the country itself has been arranged by some careful hand into constellations of hope. Each window glowing against the dark is a pulse, a single proof of life, and together they form the quiet anatomy of a civilization learning to trust the dark again. The snow covers everything evenly, mansions and shacks, cities and barns, erasing difference for one brief, merciful night. It is the only kind of equality that history ever truly allows, the hush of winter, the blanket of peace. Inside those glowing homes, the people dream ordinary dreams, of gardens that will bloom in spring, of streets that will be rebuilt, of children growing taller, of songs yet unwritten. Some still dream of the sea, of the trenches, of the sound of engines and commands, but even those dreams have softened at the edges. The fear has thinned, the danger feels far away, and in its place has come something quieter, the weightless ache of remembering and being allowed to forget. A veteran stirs in his sleep, reaching instinctively for a weapon that isn't there, then relaxes as his hand finds instead the warmth of his wife's shoulder. A widow breathes evenly for the first time in months, her dreams unmarked by telegrams or empty chairs. A child sleeps with a toy plane clutched in one small hand, unaware that his future will be built on the quiet labor of this single peaceful night. Far away, on a farm where the stars burn brightest, an old clock strikes midnight. Its sound rolls across the fields low and deep, counting not the hours but the distance between what was and what will be. The wind moves gently through the bare trees, whispering against the walls like a promise you've made it through. In the cities, street lamps flicker under the soft veil of snow, and for a moment before the new day begins, even the machines seem to sleep. The trains silent, the ships still, the factories breathing only in memory. It is easy to believe, standing above it all, that the world itself is exhaling, that the long, ragged breath of a century spent in turmoil has finally slowed, not to end, but to rest. The light of each window, the warmth of each home, the simple act of one more dawn waiting to rise, these are the prayers that nations say when words fail them. No marching bands, no speeches, just the soft and steady heartbeat of a people who have survived, and who now, in the holy silence of winter, begin the work of living again. And so the country sleeps, beneath snow, beneath stars, beneath the gentle hum of its own endurance, and somewhere in that sleep a whisper moves like wind through the dark. We are still here. It passes through every window, every rooftop, every field, carrying with it not pride, not sorrow, but a quiet vow that when morning comes they will rise again, build again, love again, and carry forward the fragile, magnificent peace that began so simply on one cold Christmas night.